Disability income is a powerful benefit with an important societal role, especially here in South Africa, where it helps strengthen the social safety net. But keeping this benefit relevant and sustainable is no small task. But it's an exciting challenge that those of us who are as passionate about it as we are look forward to. It is a benefit that's highly sensitive to the context, with many moving parts that make its management quite intricate. So ongoing data analytics from a systematics perspective is essential. We've taken a look at the South African industry, drawing on data from various companies. Today, we'll share an early look at what the data is revealing to us, a sneak peek into South Africa's group terminations experience. But before we start, I'd like to take you through what we'll be covering today. We'll start with some context on disability income, and then we'll introduce how we can handle some of the complexity that arises with these products. Afterwards, we'll introduce a cross-regional DI study, and then we'll share some preliminary results. But first, let me set the scene. Disability income products vary across companies and regions, and not only because of the product design, but also the terminology used. So to go through some of the key concepts that we'll be using today, I'll use this rather simple diagram. We start with the disability date, and then we move into the deferred period. After that period, the benefit starts, and the claim continues until the person either recovers, dies, or the policy ends. Now, I know that this diagram is rather elementary, but what I'd like to do is to visually anchor what makes this product so complex. Unlike death benefits, where it stops once the person dies, there are many elements that feed into this timeline, and that affects how long a person stays in claim, and ultimately, the terminations experience that we observe. So please keep this diagram at the back of your mind as I now start to explore some of these elements and how they make this product so complex, but yet so fascinating. From an analytics perspective, disability products involve a wide range of considerations that make its management so intricate. At a high level, though, the benefit seems really simple. I get injured, the benefit steps in to replace my income, I recover, and I go back to work. In reality, delivering such seamless simplicity requires a lot of sophisticated design and management behind the scenes. There are many factors to consider. We have a wide range of rating factors, not just gender. There are different deferred periods, duration and claim, select discounts, and in the retail space, smoker status as well. These factors also vary depending on whether the product is issued in the individual space or the life space. For example, in the retail space, occupation class is already so complex to deal with because it serves as a proxy for many underlying factors. But once we move into the group space, we don't even have occupation class. We rely on industry and salary bands, and these are essentially proxies for what's already a proxy. Another factor is that we have multiple disability definitions and changing definitions over time. Additionally, there are very long reporting delays that vary by deferred period and product type, and this just adds more complexity to these factors. Finally, disability products are also far more sensitive to claims management practices and underwriting practices than death benefits. Unlike death benefits, disability products involve two events: incidents and terminations. And each of these comes with its own set of patterns and drivers. But to fully understand the impact of all of these rating factors, we need data, and lots of it. In the first few years of claim, we expect a lot of people to recover, and hence, a lot of terminations. But as we stretch into those longer claim durations, those terminations become fewer and fewer. So a key consideration is this imbalance, where we have an abundance of data in some areas, but very little data in others. Another consideration is the data quality, many life insurers are selling disability products on systems that weren't originally designed for DI. So extracting and structuring this data in a way that's meaningful and useful for analysis can be quite a technical challenge. Finally, we have the relevance of historical data. With changing claims definitions and product design, we find that older data becomes more outdated and much faster than what we'd expect. It's kind of like driving with our eyes on the rearview mirror, trying to anticipate what's ahead, but only seeing what's behind. Income benefit products were designed to meet real human living needs. PHI first emerged in the market in a bid to help people in crisis after a train accident. But just like the people that these products were designed to protect, these benefits evolve, adapting to shifting changes within the ecosystem in which they operate. This makes them highly responsive to the context. Factors like claiming behavior, regulation, and tax all play an impact. Economic changes and major events like pandemic can also negatively affect terminations experience. So overall, disability products are far more sensitive to external forces than death benefits. The real complexity arises when a major shift or multiple shifts occur within this ecosystem. These changes can compound, and often to a dramatic effect. I'll walk you through some 2 real-world examples. In South Africa, during 2015 to 2018, economic weakness, aggressive competitive pricing, and tax changes all came together to change the landscape. Many insurers reported substantial losses, particularly in group disability income, where underwriting margins fell below long-term trends and adverse claims experience persisted. Meanwhile, Australia had a much tougher challenge, with reported losses of about $2.5 billion after tax. This was due to 2 factors: underpricing and very generous product features. In a bid to remain competitive, insurers introduced very generous features. And once these features were entrenched in the market, no one wanted to be the first one to pull back. The result was a perfect storm: persistent adverse claims experience that led to substantial losses. What these 2 case studies highlight is the importance of data analytics and proactive management in understanding and preparing for these major shifts. So then, what's the key to a successful analytics approach? Well, being excited about this benefit and being excited for technical challenges is a good start. And of course, having the data to be excited about doesn't hurt either. I'll now hand over to Gwib, who'll take us through exactly that, how we've approached this analysis, and what we've begun to uncover.
Good morning. As Wiswa said, running a group disability income book depends on data, and keeping your pulse on the data is very important. So what have we done? In recent years, we've done an individual study that spanned across numerous countries, you can see, and this was completed in 2023. This was for both incidents and terminations. And after that successful completion of that, we had generally decided to venture into the group market and look at the termination study in the group market. Now, there's a couple of things to be said about this study. It'll be across the UK, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand, so trying to gather a lot of data together, look at a lot of things, understand trends, hope to compare trends, those kind of things. The investigation period is for terminations between 2013 and 2023. Unfortunately, some of the data that we received to date is claims from 2013 to 2023, which means we would have wanted a bit more longer-term durations, but there's still enough, and we're engaging with some of our contributors to see if we can get a bit more. But you'll see that in a slide later. So the data's still incoming. This is not a completed study. We are still looking at things. South Africa is ahead, and after listening to Jeremy, I'm not surprised. The most of the South African data we've gathered in, so what we're showing today should be quite representative, but keep in mind that we're still kind of at the start of it, and there's a lot to still look at. Now, another thing to mention is that ideally you would want to look at incidents and terminations together. Incidents often have effect on terminations, so if you see periods of higher incidents, you might also see periods of higher terminations. That's just because higher incidents might mean that there's the causes of the claims are less severe, so then you see often quicker terminations. But we've decided to focus on termination to be able to make the burden of the study less onerous on the contributors. It's quite hard to give this kind of detailed information on incidents. Termination is a little bit easier. Okay, so when we look at this complex problem, we need some tools to help us. And a good baseline of that is a GLM model. You give it expected basis, and it outputs some adjustment to that expected basis, and we all know it and understand it and interpret it well. Another tool there is that we add to that is then splines, which help us to smooth things over time and get specifically your duration since claim, get that curve smooth where there's less data, and also it's useful for ages. And then another very useful thing is lasso regression, which is a bit of machine learning on top of the GLM. And that helps you to select the variables that you want to use. It also has a kind of similar thing to credibility weighting that it brings in, and it allows exploration of many more of the parameters. So you can quickly throw in a lot of parameters, do a lot of complex interactions, and the model will help you to sift through that quite quickly so that you can get to results and actually know what really is pushing your experience. And this is a quick example, I might go very quickly over this slide actually, of just how this kind of modeling works. You have a prior, which is in blue, and those are the number of terminations over duration since disability. Then you have your actual, which is red, and then your green is your proposed data, and you can see where there's more data, the green follows the actual a bit better, and then with time smoothly it converges into the prior. And then what's very useful is to use AI in this kind of problem. I have, in my many years ago, had to translate occupations from all kinds of spellings and languages into certain groupings, and that is luckily not needed anymore. Given that experience, I really like using AI for things that Louis have kind of talked about, is the classification of claim causes. There's some examples, and that is what we're also using here, this massive data set, all kinds of free text from all kinds of clients to try and understand your causes of claim, which is very important in terminations. Okay, so now over to some details on the study. So we're very fortunate to have 7 companies in South Africa, 7 big companies contributing data to us. Most of these companies will be in some of the results that you show today. And we've got 18,000 plus terminations, 75,000 plus exposure years, and a global estimate of 2.5 thousand employers in the formal market, which is probably quite a substantial part of South Africa's formal employment. That number is maybe a bit low. It's a bit hard to figure out with declassified data if that is the actual number. What does the standard product in South Africa look like? We have retirement ages at 65 mainly. We've got waiting period or deferred periods at 90 days, and then the definition is mostly own and any, and that just means that in terms of disability, you are assessed on your own occupation for the first period, 12 to maybe 24 months, and then after that on any kind of occupation that you can reasonably do or be trained to do. Okay, so now to show you some of the results today, I've followed quite a simple approach. I think it's useful. There's a lot more to model on this problem. There's a lot of detail that we can go into, but I think this will work for what we're showing today. So it's a simple model that allows for most common rating factors, and those are age, sex, duration since claim, deferred period, benefit payment period, benefit amount band. Okay. And then what this model gives us is an expected basis that controls for these things. So what we can look at is we can look at the kind of rates that the model outputs for these factors. And we can also look at the residual, so the A versus E, so actual versus expected, over certain factors that we haven't modeled for. That should give us a good indication of what is happening and what we're seeing in the data. So over to the results then. You'll see that what I'm showing here is the rate over duration years, and for males and for females. And as you would expect, at duration 0, the termination rates are quite high, and then over time it goes into a tail. I'm only showing 8 years, but looking for it, which make it easier to look at, but going further than that, it looks quite similar. And you can see females are higher than males initially, and then there's a bit of a crossover after year 1, where female termination rates becomes lower than male termination rates. And if you think about that, it does make sense. The longer-term termination rates would be more linked to your mortality, and we know male mortality is higher, so you should get some higher termination rates where female mortality is lower. And that would be, kind of an impaired mortality, but I suspect that still holds there. The next slide here is just looking at the age that you get disabled at, and looking at how your rates differ by that over durations. And as you would expect, the earlier you start claiming, the higher your terminations would be, and if you claim at about age 60, then your termination rate goes quite a bit lower. Chances of going back to work is less. Okay, so this is a bit of an interesting graph, and I thought it's comparative. I'll share some thoughts about it, but with this kind of, looking at these kind of results is always a bit speculative, so bear with me. So what I've done here is I've plotted the average rate against your benefit amount, so how much you get out. And then I've classified them into very low, middle, high, and very high kind of benefit amount or income. Your very low is slightly above the minimum wages, so that gives you an indication of where we're at. The very high is very high. I've split these into equal parts of the data, so we're looking at kind of quantiles of the data there. What's interesting is that the very low termination rate is higher than your low termination rates, and that's, I thought, interesting because you would expect those people to really work in a manual capacity where it is a bit harder to get back to your job. Whereas, the low, then it might be easier to get back to your job. So that's the interesting part. But what we have to think about is a bit of complexity behind this data set. And you might find that the low category there is the start of people that kind of works for government, that maybe some of the mines that are in there. And it could be that termination at those kind of institutions is different to other institutions. So that's one of those complexities that Wiswa talked about, and that you kind of need to consider. You need to start looking at your big employers in the country and make sure that you have an eye on that and see how their experience also differ across others. I think the only other thing is maybe to look at the very high, which is a bit lower. Again, on initial thinking, you might expect those to be high. It's people that want to return to work. These are like high-end individuals and so on. But that again might be that to start with, there's quite a low incidence on those kind of lives, so then you have a lower termination rate in that because it's harder to get disabled at that kind of income level that you can't do your work. So, but yeah, those are thoughts. I think there's a lot more to say and to think about these kind of things and to look at this in all kinds of different angles. So now, we've talked now about the standard rating factors that was included in the model. Now we're moving over to the model residual kind of, the A versus E. What does the model what we haven't given the model to control for? And what I'm showing here is your termination count over calendar years. And I kind of hinted at this. You'll see that there's a lot of low termination numbers initially, which means the data that we received has a lot of termination of a claim starting only in this 2023 period. So we'll try and add a bit more, going a bit farther back. What this does mean is it's hard to look at trend over time because your duration is changing over time, and the model does fit duration quite well, but there's a lot going on behind this, so there's a bit of caution there to not conclude maybe that there is a downward trend in terminations that it might look like. But there's a few things to be said about this A versus E curve. The first is, remember that lower A versus E is worse for terminations. That's in incidence, it's the other way around. So if you get more terminations, that's a good thing, and that will give a higher A versus E. The second thing is to look at the 2025 to 2018 years. And those are the years that we used to said we had some market turmoil. There was a complex experience in that time. And you can clearly see that there's a bit of a higher termination during those years. And that, again, it's a thought, could be linked to higher incidence during those times of economic turmoil, tax changes, all of that kind of stuff. So that might be a bit of a separate one. But again, remember, looking at this just like this is a bit difficult. Another thing to note is 2021, that is also the spike there, and that's COVID. So maybe a little bit more on that in the next slide. So what I've tried to do here is to make it easier to kind of see what happens by duration since claim. So I've split it into duration cohorts. And the blue line here is again the A versus E, the graph that we saw before. The blue line here is your first year after claim. The green line, the red line is years 1, 2, and 3, and then 4 plus is after that. Now you'll see 4 plus is quite volatile initially because we don't have a lot of data there, so maybe don't just ignore that part. But in duration 0, you can see that kind of pattern that we saw before, and you would expect that there's a lot of terminations in there. But you can see that pattern from 2015 to 2018, and then you can see like a little downward movement, a small bump for the 21 year. The years 1 to 2 and 3 then is a bit more flat. So there's less of a downwards movement there. I think there's really no downward movement there. And it does have quite a big bump at the 2021 year, and then the duration 4 plus has quite a big bump in 2022, or 2020, 2019, 2020, and 2021 actually. Now, if you think about this a bit, what we would expect in COVID is that you get a delay in termination. So people that are claiming would probably not have returned to work as much as you would without COVID. It was harder to get people back to work. So that could be one of the reasons. And I think that is that maybe that little bump at duration 0 and maybe a little bit of 1, 2, and 3 bump there. But the other factor for termination is death. So death does drive terminations. That's part of the termination equation. And what we can see, and I suspect that death does kind of contribute to that 4 years plus bump and the year 1, 2, and 3 bumps a bit. So just to kind of think about this then, in the last 10 years, we've potentially had 2 kinds of events that makes it hard to see what's happening in the future, right? Using this kind of data does show that there is stuff happening, and as Vishu said, there's all kinds of factors that's influencing terminations. So having a lot of data is very crucial, and I think that's something we all know, but this kind of does show it a little bit. One more thing on the 2021 year then. This is plotted, again, that A versus E graph over age bands, and you can see there that your age 50 and 60 bands have that higher spike during the 2021 year, and again, age is correlated with deaths in COVID, so you can maybe make a conclusion there. This is my final slide, and this is maybe a bit of a risky slide. Having done a basic analysis on this data does make looking at your claim causes a bit risky because there's a lot more to allow for. But I think we all are very interested in these claim causes. There's a lot of talk about these kind of things. So I've kind of thrown something together, but I would expect some of this to change as we figure out the data more, as we figure out the interaction between factors a bit more, and as we classify things a little bit better as well. So what we're seeing here is A versus E over some of the main categories. It's not all of the categories, there's quite a few more. but I thought this was useful. So what you'll see is that I'm plotting duration here. Again, duration year 0 is the light blue line, duration year 1 is the dark blue line, and the pink line is duration 4. And what you'll see is that cancer in the first year has quite a high termination rate, and that increases in year 2, and then at longer durations you do see a lot of terminations. And that probably is again a bit correlated with how serious the disease is, or maybe some good treatment. I'm maybe speculating there, but respiratory would also, you'd expect a kind of a higher termination, and there COVID is in there, so that makes that one a bit interesting. But that also shows a high termination. Endocrine shows the initial low termination with the increasing termination at longer durations. Musculoskeletal is low across the board. And then mental health, I think there's a lot of talk about mental health. There's a lot of attention on that. And that also we're seeing is quite a low termination across kind of durations. Interesting, I think Australia has got these standard industry tables that they bring out, and they've recently brought out one where they separate termination rates by mental illness as well. So there's some stuff to look at there when we're doing this study, and maybe gain a bit from that to help us gaining insights on that. Cardiovascular is low, and neurological is also low initially, and then go higher. Okay, I mean that's as much as we can show at the moment. I hope that is insightful. I think to conclude, disability products have a high number of moving parts. It's complex, and things can go wrong when they go wrong. AI analytics are a very useful tool to keep a pulse on it, but you need the data and you need the actual insight. These kind of analyses are very complex, even if you have some of these very nice tools to help you. And then I think we've seen today a few interesting things. There's some thoughts that I hope we've provoked. I unfortunately cannot tell you how Terminations is doing at the moment. We still have to look at that a bit more, but I do implore you to keep an eye out for the study. We're aiming to finish it middle next year, hoping that we can get some more of the international guys in. They have all committed, and we've received some, but it is a bit slow. Yeah, and then we'll also do a paper on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vuyiswa and Koop, for the insightful presentation. We have run out of time for questions, and it is now transfer time. So if you are going to come back to this hall, we'll be basically covering mortality trends and turbulent times. So hopefully to see you in 15 minutes' time. Also look out on the app. There's a bit of a change on the time in the agenda. You'll see that the refreshment break has been extended a bit to give you a bit more time downstairs, but otherwise now it's time for you to transfer to your next session. You are welcome to reach out to our presenters if you do have questions. Their profiles are also on the app, and you can engage further there. Thank you very much.